Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Jane, and I'm a postgrad, and I have a degree in literature, and then I also study economics at my time at Principia. And for this abroad, I focus on the cultural significance of sheep and shepherding in the Lake District, because I saw an interesting perspective on how to apply my economics background to the economic situation of shepherds. Um, to begin, sheep are a natural component to the Lake District. They are the most recognizable feature to the region and have been for centuries. Herdwick sheep have been recorded to be on the fells of the Lake District since the 12th century. From being raised on hill farms, Herdwick have evolved into the hardy breed seen on the fells today. With 50,000 Herdwick sheep hefted on the landscape, shepherds are surprised to hear the backlash from conservationist groups who want to decrease the number of sheep on the fells to increase a more natural environment. Typically, Herdwick farms are less than 100 acres of lowlands and make up most of their grazing allowance in the common lands. The commons are designated spaces up on the fells about 3,000 feet up that shepherds can combine their flocks to graze freely. If Herdwick have populated the Lake District since the 12th century, why would they be considered unnatural? More importantly, why are the shepherds being blamed for the ecological degradation of the landscape from groups of people who don't live by the land? It is unfair to shepherds, for environmental groups, to advocate for a native landscape with the disappearance of Herdwick. Based on the current poorly managed economic state of shepherds in the Lake District, the consumer base for Herdwick wool and Herdwick meat is shrinking every year. With the addition of the UNESCO World Heritage Site declaration, the fight to get shepherds more money while complying with environmental regulations is favoring nature conservation instead of cultural conservation. Shepherds are being asked to do more with less financial resources, and what we should be doing is asking them to do less with more financial resources. Those who make an effort to promote rewilding and landscape regeneration, as you've heard in Gabe's presentation, want to get rid of sheep and downsize the shepherding practice. Large flocks of sheep trample through meadows and hill pastures, compacting soil and polluting becks and waterways running through the land. Some conservationists have introduced the idea that you don't hate the sheep, you hate the shepherds. This idea is basically removing all the blame for ecological damage from Herdwick. Rather, it is the shepherds who let the sheep roam the fells and pay no mind to the newly planted saplings of the river restoration projects in the valleys. When talking with Lee Schofield at the RSPP, we saw how Haweswater has been used as an experiment to test the potential of ecological regeneration with the sudden removal of sheep. After the removal of 1,200 sheep, there was an increase in lowland biodiversity. Butterflies and moths returned to the meadows. As said in Fletcher's presentation, the water didn't need to be treated to the same intensity as when sheep were on the land. After a short period, they replaced 300 sheep, but still have a heavily moderated approach to housing sheep in Haweswater. In Ennerdale, Gareth Browning with Forestry England said he recommended farmers keep cattle instead of sheep because they weigh more and can break up the soil. Fewer cattle graze less intensively and allow for a regeneration of more flowers, thus creating a more diverse habitat. Conservationists are also in favor of planting more trees on the fells to add a wild feel to the landscape, in addition to multiple ecological and societal benefits of forested landscapes. Clearing the fells of sheep and allowing trees to mature is enough of an excuse to clear more sheep off the land. Trees are important to decrease the carbon in the atmosphere and provide a habitat to a forest-depleted landscape. Wordsworth disliked conifer plantations and larch trees, which are populating valleys like Ennerdale and creating an artificial wild feel. My question is just how natural is a plantation of non-native trees? All of the environmental organizations we encounter desire to preserve a landscape. My position is that shepherds are a direct link to the landscape and are best suited to preserving the landscape into the future. Shepherds may be working harder to preserve their livelihood than conservationists because of their intimate relationship with the land. Shepherds rely on land and the sheep they raise. With the cultural significance of sheep in Lake District, it can be said that shepherding is a form of conservation. method of preserving a culture within a cultural landscape. This is me with Beatrix Potter. Beatrix Potter, best known for writing the Peter Rabbit books, was an advocate for preserving Herdwick sheep and dedicated land usage. She bought Hilltop Farm, which is 34 acres of a then economically unviable land. She then bought neighboring farms like Castle Farm to try and make it more economically viable. She was introduced to Herdwick sheep by a Mr. Cannon Rawnsley and reared a small flock on her small farm. In a letter to Rawnsley's widow, Potter wrote, "The Cannon's original aim for complete preservation as much as property as possible by acquisition was the right one for the Lake District." By the age of 70, she had managed 8,000 acres of farmland in the Lake District. Her work helped create the national park and preserve Herdwick in their native landscape. Upon her death, she left 4,000 acres of land and property to the National Trust, and eventually more after the death of her husband. Potter had contributed the largest donation to the National Trust and is a leading proponent of the 24% of land owned by the National Trust today. Although Beatrix Potter was an advocate for land preservation, it is still noted that she had incredible funds to complete this type of conservation. Shepherds in today's market don't have the same financial chance to buy their land and practice shepherding however they please. Chris Hodgson, a Tennant Hill farmer on Rydal Farm, has been shaken by the lack of consumer interest in his Herdwick sheep. He has shared that it is more expensive to shear the sheep than to sell its wool. The meat isn't in as high of a demand as it was in previous generations, and implementing environmental regeneration schemes on his farm are not making him any money. The water company has installed a hydropower station along a beck in one of his lowland pastures that provides power to 500 homes in the surrounding area. The revenue generated from the beck is only going back to the water company, not Hodgson. To find ways to generate more revenue, Hodgson has built a wedding rental space in his barn to earn just enough to get by. Herdwick sheep only make Hodgson 23,000 pounds a year. He receives government subsidies that amount to around 75,000 pounds to make up the difference. He is worried about the aging shepherding population and the disinterested younger generations that may leave the lifestyle obsolete. Hodgson explained that with the increasing amount of second homes and the increasing rent prices, without a local community to drive the local economy and fund infrastructure and necessary services, the Lake District will lose its culture. To stimulate a local economy, Hodgson suggests a tax on tourism on holiday homeowners. He thinks that if they won't contribute to the local economies, they can at least pay a fee for displacing hill farmers. When talking with Julia Agliambi with the Foundation for Common Land, she held the idea that you take away a cultural identity without a farm landscape. If hill farmers are driven out of their own homes because of rent price hikes, lower income rates, and overall disinterest in the profession, the Lake District will no longer be sustainable for Herdwick farming. Agliambi has worked with hill farmers in the past to try and find a common ground between saving the environment and saving the sheep. She explained that the tragedy of the commons, or the overexploitation of the land from food rationing after World War II, is what skewed the figures for proper land usage. Hill farming became very mechanized and transformed into large-scale productions to keep up with demand. Without the pressure of wartime recovery, hill farming needs to be evaluated and fairly compensated for their products. So now we're going to talk about Wordsworth, your favorite. Shepherds are the native people of the Lake District, and in recent years they have been overlooked in favor of the environment. Shepherds of the 19th century have felt the economic hardship of their profession as well. With the example of William Wordsworth's poem, The Last of the Flock, the reader can quickly understand the turmoil the shepherd is feeling. As the man is invited to share his woes with Wordsworth, he reveals that he is suffering a great loss. His lamb is the last of his flock, and that he has worked years to grow and strengthen. He is at a breaking point as he talks to Wordsworth in the road. Wordsworth reports the shepherd's words by saying, "And now I care not if we die and perish all in poverty." And so then, as the man has lost his sheep, his livelihood, he is losing hope in being able to provide for his family in the future. His claims, his exclamations are a further iteration of his anxieties towards providing enough to sustain his household. Wordsworth writes the man as saying, "6 children, sir, had I to feed, hard labor in a time of need. My pride was tamed, and in our grief, I of the parish asked relief. They said I was a wealthy man, my sheep upon the mountain fed, as it was fit that thence I took, whereof to buy us bread. Do this, how can we give you to you, they cried, what to the poor is due." Wordsworth points out the lack of understanding from the parish in regard to asking for money to buy basic provisions for all his children. To the parish committee, who determine who deserves any amount of money, the sight of the man's sheep up on the fells means he is not in a destitute enough state to be seeking aid for himself and his family. This lack of aid from a system designed to help shepherds, like this man, get out of dire situations, like losing an entire flock of sheep, can have devastating consequences. Further in the poem, the shepherd says, "To wicked deeds I was inclined, and wicked fancies crossed my mind. And every man I chanced to see, I thought he knew some ill of me. No peace, no comfort could I find, no ease within doors or without. And crazily and wearily I went my work about. Oft times I thought to run away, for me it was a woeful day." The unreliable relief system in place has led the man into a state of mild paranoia. At every passerby, he thinks that they are out to get him for something he did or considered doing. The state of insanity, it seems, to have driven the man to feel cursed. He has an obligation to provide for his family as well as the lamb he holds in his arms. Wordsworth invites the reader to ponder the uncertainty of the man being able to provide enough for both parties. Okay, now the fun part, economics. The environmental organizations seem to be getting more funding than the shepherds. Nature conservation is being made, and shepherds need to be compensated for their work on the land. By introducing a tourism tax, it can generate revenue for shepherds to decrease their sheep numbers while maintaining a comfortable wage. With tourism infrastructure improvements like entry pay points and public revenue-generating tourist attractions, funding can be made to decrease reliance on government subsidy and increase overall self-sufficiency. So on this first slide, I've just provided simple vocab for economics. So we have marginal social cost, which is the cost that society pays as a result of the production of additional goods and services. Marginal private cost is the change in the producer's total cost brought about by the production of goods and services. And willingness to pay is the maximum price consumers are willing to pay for a good or service. Okay, so don't be scared by all the big words I'm about to say. In an optimal scenario, the tax fully internalizes the negative social costs, reducing the number of visitors or the length of their stays at tourist destinations from T, which is the first one by the mouse arrow, to T with the apostrophe up one. However, because price is one of the primary factors determining the selection of a destination by tourists, and tourist demand is typically highly elastic, meaning it fluctuates, the introduction of a tourism tax can substantially affect the number and length of visits to a destination at the advantage of similar, less expensive locations, and this effect can be the effect can be that the demand for tourism goes down and supply for shepherds goes up. A tourism tax can further reduce the demand if the fiscal revenues are not used accordingly to the tourist preferences or to support the location's attractiveness. Indeed, as long as there are competing destinations perceived by tourists as being good substitutes for the taxed ones, the tax could induce not only a movement along the demand function from the, I'm going this way, up, but also a downward shift of the demand, which is the second one going down this way, further decreasing the amount of tourists. So, To make the graph more specific, the figures would be willingness to pay is the taxation amount tourists would be willing to pay to enter or holiday in the national park. Marginal private costs would be the cost of living for shepherds, decreasing, and more resources would be available for them. Marginal social costs would be the number of tourists decrease with the same amount of revenue generated. Simply put, the supply of money for shepherds goes up and the demand for tourists goes down. Thank you.